Um, Welcome, everybody. This is your Nature Journal workshop Spotlight with your host, John Muir Laws. That's me, and Avea Moore, the mad botanist herself. And we're happy to be here with you all. We've got a special guest host today. Miriam Morrill is a really amazing nature journaler, graphic artist, thinker, fire ecologist, and scientific communicator who I find incredibly inspiring. I'll tell you a little bit more about Miriam in a moment. While we're waiting for a few more people to join our meeting, what we'd like to do is just let everybody know what are some opportunities that are coming up in the nature journaling community right now. There's lots of cool classes, lots of things ways that you can get involved with nature journaling and near you, and some wonderful teachers who are offering workshops and classes to help you advance your skills. We just want to highlight some of those. And Avea, would you let us know what's happening out there?
Sure thing. Some of the things going on in this community. I'm going to stop here because there's way too much goodness going on in the world. And I'm going to pass it to my incredible friends, Miriam Morrill and Jack Laws. Miriam, also one of my favorite people. So I hope that this is a wonderful session for everybody. And thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
I'm
you
good.
so much,
Oh,
Avea. Sorry, Miriam.
I was just gonna, should I start my screen share then?
Well, no. Let me just sort of I want to let people know why we brought you on, and just let folks know that you are incredible. I want to live your life. Miriam is now on the road. She is zooming in with us from the van down by the river. But look outside the window there. She's gone mobile, and is traveling around having adventures and doing really cool stuff. Um, Miriam is really interested in fire and our sort of human awareness of the landscape around us. Um, and that's really important as pertains to fire. So the idea of having situational awareness of, like, am I in a fire zone? Some people don't realize they're in a fire zone until the fire's there. And then, hey, how did this happen? Um, but looking at the world through the lens of fire gives you a way to kind of see into deep time, and will encourage you to look into the past. If you can read the signs, you can see into the past, and you can predict forward what may happen. Um, so Miriam brings all these skills together, and also is a amazing visual thinker. Um, Miriam can take a concept and idea and think about what would that look like in a graphic, in a picture, and um, has invented on her own a whole bunch of amazing ways of visualizing stuff, or sometimes has taken other people's visualizations that are okay and then turned them into something that is utterly brilliant. And so I love the way that you think. And also, I really appreciate your insight into kind of how to think in landscapes that are um, where fire is a factor, and that would be, oh, everywhere. Um, the I recently got this book that is a bunch of Miriam's brain on paper, and I want to encourage everybody to scamper out there and get this for several reasons. One, um, it's going to dramatically change your situational awareness about fire in your landscape. Number two, it will open up all sorts of doors to thinking about ways of visualizing stuff that are incredibly useful. So you can look for this through this book as sort of nature journaling skills. Before we start, I just wanted to do a quick kind of flip through the book to sort of show people what you get, because you get some. This is the book is thick, and you're going to, a lot of people would expect, okay, there's going to be like that's going to be like dense. I don't think I really want to read something like that. Okay, I'm dyslexic, and so reading is hard for me. And I absolutely love the way that this book is sort of laid out. It passes my test. Can I sit down for 5 minutes, open a random place, and come away having learned something kind of concrete and really useful? This book is all about that. So I just want to, before Miriam gets on, I just wanted to kind of do a kind of quick flip. And Miriam, maybe you've been using some of these graphics to kind of go deeper on topics that we're talking about today. But I just wanted to show people, like, it's all in here. This is such an intelligent work. So let's just take a quick look, boom, right here. And if you just sort of go through the book, you're going to see that there are tons of, I love thinking with pictures. The layout is really, really clear. I can look at this and I'm learning things like, oh my gosh, I didn't know that I've seen this cloud formation a zillion times. I didn't know that this was different wind speeds. Um, and then there's things in here about, like, should you be journaling about this stuff? Here's ways of drawing that. Here's ways of thinking about things. And you're going to see diagrams that go well beyond some of the basics that you've seen before. You might have seen, like, I've seen a diagram that's kind of like that before, but no, like this will take it to the next level. It's just incredibly rich book filled with very interesting visualizations of what is happening on the landscape, how you can look at this. Here's like all of these lovely tables about how wind moves around landscapes, up and down hills. It's just gorgeous. So I want to encourage you to check this out. Okay. And it will change the way you think about fire, and it will open up your brain to ways of visualizing information that are game-changing. And so even if you're not interested in fire, get this book. It is all about how to think. Here we're during an active fire. What do things look like post-fire back here? How to be a forensic fire ecologist and look at the little tails in the landscape that tell you exactly which way the wind came from, and then the fire moved over here, and then it did this, and then it did this. How to put all those stories together. I absolutely love this. And so this just pushes all my buttons on all sorts of different levels. It's ecology, it's thinking, it's visual representations of things. It is doing a really, really deep dive. What is the thing below the thing below the thing that you thought you knew about? It's all about this. Miriam, you're a rock star, and thank you for being with us today. I'm going to make my screen go whoop so that you have the full screen here to kind of talk to people. But I'm so excited about getting to pick your brain today. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Jack. Thank you very much. All right, let me jump to my slides here and get to the beginning. So I really wanted to, rather than walk through a lot of details of the book, kind of wanted to go to the purpose and really the foundational thinking and approach behind the book, which is situational awareness. And so I'll go through some examples of things I did in the book, but this approach can be applied very broadly through any kind of outdoor activities and relates and overlaps and connects with nature journaling. So I'm not going to just walk through a presentation of the book. I want to talk about this foundational situational awareness approach. And kind of first, the reason why I went into this is I had a career in fire management, and I worked at the policy, the planning, the training, education, guidance level. And for years was just getting more and more frustrated. Things were changing and just the issue getting bigger and bigger. And I felt like the education side was really, really lacking. And I'd become introduced to nature journaling towards the end of my career. And it just set off these light bulbs of, oh, I think this is the tool that is really going to help connect things, because there's a lot of information out there. And oftentimes it can be confusing and meaningless. And so I wanted to go through all of my fire training manuals and all of this information and think about it from an observation, personal perspective. And then, how do you become more aware? How do you kind of think through the meaning of this and process it? So it really is about taking information and how do you observe something in nature and use it for situational awareness. So I'll go through what situational awareness is, and there are a lot of different definitions. But as I was kind of thinking about how I wanted to talk about it, I kind of felt like I wanted to use, if people, hopefully everybody's familiar with Harry Potter and Dudley, the Muggle, but I kind of felt like I wanted to explain the difference, because I think people confuse situational awareness with just general awareness or environmental awareness, and it really is something different. And first, there's sense making, and I have that associated with the Muggle, but it really is very human ways of knowing. And this is kind of an embodied way of knowing. It's not just, I got an education and I know these things, but how do you relate to it? How do you respond to something? And so your sense of place, you hear a lot of that. And that is very much based around your past experiences, what knowledge you have, your values, kind of, it all entangles into this embodied way of knowing. But your general kind of human sense making can be very back looking. It's taking a lot of what you had known and trying to relate it to a changing world. And nature journaling is so fantastic, because with curiosity, you're continuing to evolve your sense of a place, but it still is just kind of taking what you have known and what you have experienced and trying to relate it to a future. Now, situational awareness, from when I've seen it like really done well, people that have amazing situational awareness, they seem kind of like a wizard or a shaman, or just somebody that's like, holy moly, how did you know that was going to happen? How did you predict this? How did you respond to something? And they can go well together. As you develop situational awareness, it can feed into your sense of things. But situational awareness in our modern world can be very limited, because we're not constantly outdoors and living this. Indigenous peoples, they had very strong situational awareness because they lived and experienced things and were able to kind of keep it going. So if you're kind of limited in your experience outdoors, we've kind of faded off in our ability to be aware of what cues are important. But situational awareness is very much an awareness of an elevating situation. And I'll be talking a little bit more about what that is. So, but think about it as this is a forward-looking, predicting based on cues you're seeing and being able to use that and respond. But it is, I will say that it can be work to start with, especially if you haven't kind of grown up with this knowledge of working through something and this experience of a place and how things change. When you have really good situational awareness, once you've developed it, it becomes very intuitive. It's almost like your body can react before your brain thinks through it. So it can be very, very powerful. It can seem intimidating, but once it's developed, it's amazing. And let me just give an example of situational awareness that I think most people are familiar with. If you think about being around dogs. Now, a lot of people have been around dogs and they've been raised to recognize what cues are telling you this situation could go bad. So the ears are pinned back, the hair goes back, maybe they're growling. Those are all cues telling you that you can predict that there could be an elevated situation. And so that can allow you to respond and do something different, kind of enhancing it. So it doesn't have to be just based on avoiding danger. It can just enhance your situation and your experience. But that's so that knowing to be aware of those cues, what they mean, and then how to respond is very much the foundation of situational awareness. So just kind of the definition, I've kind of broken it down from different definitions you can find online about it, but it is this very dynamic process of awareness, and it's specific around a situation. And so it's not just generally being aware of everything, but knowing what you're doing, where you are, and how that relates, and it can change. And then knowing what potential elevated situations you have, whether they're risks or threats, just a whole mix of things. It can be from paying attention to poison oak, rattlesnakes, rolling rocks and hills. There are a whole lot of things. It doesn't have to be just fire. The whole book was focused around the fire environment, which is much broader than what most people think. And so it does go through looking at so many different things, but this dynamic awareness based on where you are and what you're doing, your goals. Then you have your gathered cues that you're looking for, and you need to find what the meaning is behind that, what it's telling you, and then how to use that, how to gain insight in what might happen next. It's also that woven in with your sense of place, the what has happened, looking at the cues of what is happening, and then what may happen. So just think of it as this dynamic kind of using past information, what is happening now, and how can I use that in the future? What limits your situational awareness? The very first chapter in my book is very much, sorry about that, we have dogs in here. Is the very first chapter is focused on situational awareness and also kind of journaling your emotions, because these things can limit your situational awareness. When you're fatigued, when you have distractions and stress, you tend to kind of withdraw within yourself, and you're not always seeing things happening around you or hearing things. You're not always focused. Nature journaling is so fantastic, and that's one reason I really gravitated towards how do I use nature journaling to enhance situational awareness in an environment, because it's teaching you how to observe and pay attention and focus. The other part is situational awareness, that gaining meaning behind it. When you have poor information and uncertainty, confusion in our modern world, sometimes it's too much information in the fire world, but that can complicate just really walking through this awareness, and how do you embody that and recognize what's changing around you and how you can use that. And so recognizing that there are challenges with what that information and meaning is. So thinking and working through that process of how it influences your mind and how you're observing things. Core mental models is kind of that process of how are you thinking about it? When you think about something stressful, do you just kind of shut down? How do you process information? And so when you have these core mental models of you're frustrated, you're worn down, you're not thinking through, or just kind of being in the moment and going through this process of situational awareness, you can train yourself to have better mental models. And then just a lack of practice of going through and experiencing different situations, and that journaling exercises can help you prepare for future situations you'll need higher awareness for. And I have this little cartoon here kind of showing how technology can be really a distraction for situational awareness. I do in my book talk a lot about technology, and I use it a lot. I use a lot of online weather, and I use my phone for looking up information, but I do have to weigh out if I'm going out with the intent of enhancing situational awareness and not pulling out my phone, or just being aware of how I'm using technology is a part of working on your situational awareness.
Miriam, before we jump on, could you just say a little bit more about the mental models? I'm not quite clear on what that means.
Yeah, your mental models of your ways of approaching or thinking about it, setting up a practice, just if you just kind of walk into a situation and you've never gone through training or experience or a thought process, that oftentimes we can just kind of blank out on something. And so you can study, just like a lot of people study, how do I nature journal? That mental model of how am I journaling? How am I observing? You can go through and think about, how do you approach risks and hazards and things that can kind of stress you out? What is your way of dealing with that? What is your mental process for how do you respond and interact with that? And so if you integrate a nature journaling practice of situational awareness, you can kind of retrain and develop this mental model of, when I come into confusing information or hazardous stuff in the environment, how can I use that? And if you've trained yourself to kind of predict different scenarios and you know the cues, you can set yourself up for, I'm going to think through this and these are my options. And so it's setting up this pattern of thought and behavior. Does that kind of make sense?
It does. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. So improving your situational awareness, I think there's a lot of stuff we do in nature journaling that's already doing that practicing being in the moment, focusing, that is such a skill. And that really is, when I go through phases of situational awareness, that's the first phase of focus, paying attention. Part of that is then limiting distractions of things that are limiting your focus. I really, because of nature journaling, but also in the fire world, so many of those cues are things that are not just what you see, they're what you smell, what you hear. Things to cue into are not always visual. And so practicing different sensory observations, even if it's not focused on the fire environment, or if you want to use situational awareness for other things, just by practicing, when I make an observation, how can I observe that, what's important, through a different lens, a different sense, and just practicing that skill. And as you start developing those, you'll cue into them more. For me, in the fire environment, a lot of it is when things are dry, and there's a long period that things are dry, but the amount of moisture in the air has a dramatic effect on fire. So my situational awareness, it's been really, once I've started doing this deliberate practice, I can be distracted and I'm walking my dogs and thinking about something, and I step on a leaf and it does this crunch sound. And all of a sudden I come out of like, oh, wait, it's really, really dry out here right now. I should be having a little more elevated attention to the environment because it's really, really dry. And because I've deliberately practiced, what do things sound like and smell like when I need elevated situational awareness? Now, even though my vision may be distracted, other things are jumping in and working. My body's kind of working in this overall situational awareness. So I really think huge value in different sensory observations around these different targeted observations, these things that are considered your risks or hazards. And I'll talk more about that. And so that's the learning and watching important cues and changing conditions. How do we know what those are? And I'll kind of go through my process in doing that and then practicing that. And that's where this can be such a big part of nature journaling. So as they define phases of situational awareness, and I'll let you know that situational awareness is very often defined by your career area or what you're doing. That in fire, they have an entire checklist of things that you should be aware of. But what is sad, and one reason I wanted to do the book, and a lot of firefighters, especially early firefighters, have really liked what I've done here, because it's teaching them to observe. It's not just giving you a list of, be careful of this, look for that. It's how do you actually practice observing and use that in situational awareness? And so being aware that this is a phase. And so if you want to practice it and develop it, and you can follow through the book and do that around the fire environment, which is the weather, it's vegetation conditions, terrain, but you can do it around so many other things. But so first part of the phase is that perception, detecting it, observing it. And I kind of liken it to Jack, the I notice, your perception, the I notice. And so if you're just journaling, you are working on your perception, but then you have to target it around, What are those elevated scenarios, and what makes it elevated? Why is it elevated? What is the meaning behind it? What is it telling me? And I would kind of take a spin on the it reminds me of, and that it reminds me of can be a little bit of your sense of place, that it reminds me of these things I've known, but think about it as predicting, like, and it informs me of. What is it helping me predict? What is it helping me think about and respond to? And so that's your prediction, projecting into the situation of, I'm doing this, I want to go here, what is happening based on what I want to do. And you can think of that as the I wonder or the I predict, and kind of expand on nature journaling to elevated situations, and then practicing those. You don't want to wait or just go into some scenario without knowing how you process information and respond to it. And so practicing through a journaling technique, this full process can really help you develop that. So this is the process I went through. And if we want to talk a little bit in a little while about how you've done it, if people have done this in the past, or maybe other ways of thinking about it. But in developing the book, I found that, and because I am knowledgeable about it, and you could probably find other sources, but you want to frame what those targeted observations are and find meaning, because it would bog you down to try and think about everything. And I'll give you examples, because we're going to walk through wind observations, and I'll kind of explain the difference of just wind versus situational awareness of wind. But one way you could start in how do you frame what are these targeted observations and meanings is first just to start with, where are your anxieties? What seems like an elevated situation to you in nature? And I did that in fire of, when is it really no fire hazards and risks? When is it kind of low to moderate? When is it getting extreme? And knowing what those observations are. But if I didn't have that knowledge, I might just first start with, okay, I just want to learn how to do situational awareness. What am I kind of nervous about? Am I afraid of bears? Am I afraid of snakes? What's bringing me anxiety? And I can walk through the process of situational awareness. And that's a starting point to frame this. And then thinking about your gaps in knowledge, your experience with that, and where can you find more information? Who might you talk to about that? How do you gather up these information sources to fill those gaps? And one way that I kind of did that, I kind of narrowed that down, and you don't have to read this table, it's from my book. And it was just kind of first setting up that situational awareness that it's phased. Things are always changing out there, and those elevated situations means it's phased. It's not always extreme. And being out in nature, people have lived and adapted and responded. And it doesn't have to be, when you think of situational awareness, it doesn't have to always be stressful. You can calm that down. You can give yourself a little more response and that mental model that can help you. And so it's kind of, whether you're doing it around something with clear hazard levels, it can also be thought of as a probability of something. And so, my table there is an example of thinking about things over both temporal, over time, and over spatial, of kind of these different scales of things changing, of when this probability of things being higher. But let's walk through like the example of a rattlesnake, that it might be something you're kind of worried about. And if you're looking up information, thinking about what you know, and you're looking it up, you might look at their geographic occurrence, and you have a big range map, and you just think, well, they can be everywhere. So am I going to be everywhere all the time afraid of rattlesnakes? And then looking at other things like their habitat preferences and other information. So you could be gathering this into a table, a dichotomous key, kind of thinking of the probability of when you have an elevated situation with rattlesnakes. And you might realize, okay, so maybe they prefer a certain elevational zone. And so that's kind of narrowing down, when I'm a certain area, that the probability is getting higher. Maybe they want rock piles and wood debris and these other things. Maybe they want to be a certain distance from water. So if you're looking up different things, you could do this for poison oak. You could do this for a lot of other things, of looking at what kind of information and then taking it to your other sensory observations, thinking about, so, maybe you can't always observe rattlesnakes to know they're there, but what are other signs that could tell you that, okay, so it's during different seasons, there's going to be a higher probability. What does that look like? You could go out and journal that, does the grass smell different? What's happening around you, and just kind of getting your body tuned into recognizing when these combination of things. And so all of a sudden now you've figured out that within a range, within a certain elevation, maybe on a particular aspect or slope versus another one, the probability is higher, and you can kind of shift. You've kind of trained your situational awareness and created this practice. So let me stop and ask if there are some questions kind of about how to do this, because it's not always clear. And in the book, I've gone through this whole probability hazard levels of kind of walking through it, but maybe there are questions that might make it clearer for in general if you want to apply situational awareness to other things. I don't know, Jack, do you have thoughts?
Yeah, but what this is really making me think of is how we have a general human tendency, if there's something that we're afraid of, to avoid thinking about it. And so that pushes us, I think our human tendency is in the opposite direction of situational awareness. If I'm afraid of fire, I don't want to think about fire. I don't want to be in this place with sort of imagining where the fire would come from if the wind was like this and I was camping here, because I'm scared of fire. And so then my reaction is to just push all of those ideas away. And that takes me, what you're trying to do is take something that is a threat and get curious about it.
Yeah, and you realize it isn't always a threat, everywhere, right, all the time, and it's always changing. And so, how do you think about that? And right, by doing that, you can realize how a lot of these things are just a part of the environment and how that shifts and changes. Yes. It's not just this overwhelming, hide from idea of a threat or a risk. And so, how do you think about that? And how do you see and feel and embody those changes of what can be a risk, but the probability of it is going to shift?
Yeah, and so then I'm going to revise what I was saying. Instead of thinking of it like, we avoid it, I think that there's two behaviors that we have, and this seems to be, you're like Odysseus kind of slipping through Scylla and Charybdis here. On one side, you have avoidance of things we feel uncomfortable with. On the other side is hypervigilance. Mm-hmm. And when we're hypervigilant, not only is it stressful, but we cannot maintain a state of hypervigilance for very long. And so we just get exhausted and then aren't going to be able to pick up on the real cues. I think this is true of any kind of potential threat. If you're trying to be hypervigilant, you're not going to be able to maintain that state, and so eventually you'll just go numb. And here you're trying to have us be. There are cues that leaf under your foot is a great example, right? Mm-hmm. Where like this cue triggers you to go like, okay, dry. All right, what else do I need to notice now? Mm-hmm. Oh, look at the wind. Right. I think that this is a useful framework of how to not just think about fire, but how to kind of be in any place, whether that's walking through an urban area or through a forest.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that there are a lot of people that are from more urban areas and maybe unfamiliar with a lot of things they see on TV or they hear about, and they have this overarching fear of being out there and doing things in nature because they haven't had those experiences. and haven't gone through this process of being with other people, or, how to work through situational awareness and kind of weigh out how to handle those potential risks and add better context for it. So, yeah. So I'll go through some of my sloppy journal examples, but just some, how do you kind of key into other senses? Because we are very visual based. And so oftentimes you're just looking at things. And so, trying to more often key into using other senses. And this was my dry leaf sort of thing, and just practicing and trying to go through how do I experience this condition when things are dry. And for fire, it's what they call fine fuels. The things on the ground and the grasses are the fine fuels, and those can change within an hour based on the amount of relative humidity and temperature. And so it's very shifting. And in the morning, you could walk through and that leaf may sound like stepping on plastic or leather. And in the afternoon, it's going to crumble and break in your hands or under your foot. So, just kind of building up. But there are other things, thinking about the scent and the sound of those. So just kind of sometimes tables are ways to do that. But then that might be part of things we could talk about, is how do you integrate other senses for a key observation that you might think is just a visual cue. So I wanted to go into wind observations, and this really is one of my favorites. And it wouldn't have been in the past until I was working on the book and really realizing to tune into wind. It's, something that maybe you only think you see pushing through trees. And there's such a depth of observations. And I only know that because I kind of walked through what can add meaning behind wind observations. And I think Jack even stopped on this from my book, one of the illustrations, clouds. Almost all of my cloud observations in the book are intended to help focus in on winds. So you may not even feel anything, no wind at the ground level, but you'll be seeing things at different levels of the sky, clouds telling you about winds, which can help you then forecast that the highest level, your cirrus clouds up at the high level of the sky, those are typically predicting out what winds you'll experience up to 24 hours ahead. So you're seeing cirrus clouds coming through, and you can very often tell you that a warm front is coming in. And so you could have more rain, but you're having a changing weather system at a high level, these weather systems coming through. Also looking at, as clouds are building, if you're starting to see them carved and stretched and pulled and ribboned, there's a lot of stuff going on with wind. And even though you're not experiencing it, you may not be experiencing it now, you probably will be in the near future. And so it was amazing to think about, I'm not feeling any wind, but I'm doing wind observations based on clouds. And so kind of learning and cueing into those. And that's something I've put a lot of effort into, especially with weather and winds in the book. The other thing, this has been really fun, and I've kind of known some of that in the past, but I didn't really deliberately think about that and think about how wind, even if I'm not feeling it at the moment, how vegetation and the land and the soil has been carved and shaped by wind. A lot of other things can carve and shape plants and other things, water, but it helps you think about it. What has been carving and shaping the land? What is the direction of that? And so wind felled trees, other things can cause a tree to fall over, but oftentimes it's wind. And if you're noticing that a lot of any trees that have fallen in a particular direction, the kind of winds that can knock over a tree are usually storm winds. And it could tell you which directions have storms typically been coming and knocking over trees, and just kind of learning about things. And I think most people have seen trees that are all gnarled and pushed over, especially along the coast, and learning how to tune into that. And my next slide is going to talk a lot more about some of what techniques on looking at those carved. Now, other things, just trying to get light, and other things, if it's crowded and then trees have been removed, might make it look that way. And you want to look at a mix of things, but just using these to cue in and think about it and be aware And when you put that together, all of a sudden you've got a story of how wind could be there. And some places you may not have a lot of vegetation in a desert. And I noticed that, and there's a lot of information about wind sheltered effects, that on the lee side, you may have a lot more debris. There may be more animal burrows and rabbit poop and things. And so even though the trees or the bushes and the cactus may not be shaped by the wind necessarily, that soil certainly has. And you can see different sand dune shapes and things. And so I really, really enjoy going through and comparing what I'm currently feeling with what has been done on the land to see overall what is the story of wind. And I relate it to fire, but you could be relating it to a lot of other things. So I found the Griggs-Putnam Index while working on the book when I was trying to find what observations can tell me about past winds. And it started, I don't know where it exactly started, but it was used and different guides were developed for wind industry, wind energy. And they had done a lot of studies and found out that the degree of carving of not only the shape of trees, but even as fine as needles or leaves being curved in a certain direction on different sides of the trees could tell you the wind speed. So not only the wind direction, you can tell that it's been pushed one way. There are some tools, and maybe you're never really comfortable trying to assume the wind speed, but man, is it fun and interesting to think about and go through and use a tool like the Griggs-Putnam Index to try and get an idea of what the wind speeds are when you're not even feeling it. Now, there are differences on how temperature and wind work together, that these strong winds in the winter are going to have more distinct influences on the shape of those trees. Coastal salt air, much stronger effects. So you'll get that carved and sculpted trees more on a coastal area than you will inland with the same speeds. But these are ways to cue in and think about wind direction and wind speed. And my little sketch there, you don't have to be a good artist. I go in and I won't just draw a single tree I see carved. Usually I've seen a trend, and most of them are kind of bending that way. And so I'll go in and draw a few of them and try and think about what trend and what type of wind systems have been coming through the area.
Could I drop a question on this series here?
Uh-huh.
So is this like the Beaufort wind scale where you're telling the wind speed right now, or is this something for predicting wind speeds in major storm events?
So
this is like the tree would be kind of locked in this shape.
the trees, so it's prevailing winds. So that's like the strongest ongoing winds in an area. So it's not you can, if you have your few prevailing winds, your most common winds are a certain storm system, it would be, but it may just be a sea breeze or different things that have whatever those prevailing winds, but they're typically those general winds that come through. So you may have more north winds, or you may have these other, but I think of it as past winds, because and you can use that to predict. So, and you can use that to compare with what you have right now. It's like you may be having winds of like, oh, okay, it's 8 miles or somewhere between 8 to 12 miles per hour winds. But if I see these signs out here, I'll know, whoa, okay, that level of throwing, of carving of the tree means that they can have winds this much. And they're coming from and it looks like it would come in a different direction than I'm here. So you can kind of use those to help you predict as well. So kind of using the past and the present to predict the future.
So are these trees then more, are they showing you kind of what is prevailing wind, or is it showing you what, I know that sometimes there are rare extreme events, let's think of the 100-year flood, that really carves the landscape.
It's the ongoing winds, because they're growing. They're always growing and changing.
Got it.
Continuous ongoing wind is constantly, they can never just bounce back and get back to normal. If it was just a storm, they might break a branch because they haven't quite adapted. But if there's a constant wind, they kind of continue to grow and develop into these shapes that have been constantly kind of pushed. And so they're adapting and growing based on an ongoing.
Yes. Okay, that makes
force.
lots of sense to me.
Yeah.
And the distinction between, say, riverbanks being carved by these periodic flood events is that the trees then continuing to grow under these conditions, and so you're seeing its response to sort of this over time. That makes a lot of sense.
Okay. Thank you. And then Beaufort, the Beaufort wind force scale. So
I've got it. Sorry to keep interrupting you. I've always wondered how to pronounce this fellow's name. Beaufort.
I pronounce it Beaufort, but I'm not sure. I could totally be wrong. I'm just used to pronouncing it
I
Beaufort.
wanted you to know.
Not wrong. Beaufort.
I have no idea. I have no idea.
I'm used to people saying Beaufort, so I'm
Okay.
assuming that's how, but I don't know. So I will say that I created my own Beaufort scale, and I really recommend you do it yourself. And when I kind of mentioned your steps of developing situational awareness, I went out and looked at, went online and looked at all these different Beaufort scales, and everybody kind of defines it a little bit different and has a slightly different illustration. And I kind of thought about the places where I've been and the observations that I've seen, and put this together, and just the experience of, even if it's not an illustration or fancy, whether you're describing it in words or trying to sketch it, ideally some combination of words, numbers, and pictures, going through that for your local environment. And that gives you a baseline for comparison for your Beaufort scale, because it's really hard actually, but kind of trying to come up with wind speeds, because not only do you have wind speed, which is typically that continuous wind of, at least 3 hours of a wind gusts are a different part of it. So wind speeds, and then the wind gusts are messing with your observations. And so it can be really challenging. But if you have something to look at to kind of help you, and then you're actually getting the forecast, maybe you also have a tool for measuring wind, and you combine those and constantly do a comparison, all of a sudden you might refine this a bit differently and kind of learn winds at a different way. And so this was my baseline of all the winds. But for situational awareness, I'm going to be revising this. And my practice is not the whole Beaufort scale. I don't care about winds that are really below 10 miles an hour, because in fire, once it gets to at least 10 miles an hour, things start to change for potential fire behavior and spread. Depending on the environment, sometimes in a forest, you might need a slightly higher wind speed to be pushed through. But it's just really the initial where things start to, I need to have situational awareness. It's when winds are 10 miles an hour. So for me, I'm not trying to differentiate between 1 to 3 miles an hour versus 4 to 7. I'm only paying attention to when it reaches about 10 miles per hour, because that's kind of my cue of that's for fire becoming an issue. And maybe you're mostly concerned about hiking, and when is the risk of branches falling down and hitting me, or trees falling over. And so you might want to cue into, I only care, when it's starting to tell me that it's going to get bad. And so I can, either see that in the forecast and I know what it's going to look like and feel like, but not waiting until you get to that threshold, but you're working your way up. So for me, for situational awareness, I don't need to know the whole range. I'm really focusing on that 10 mile per hour, which is in the 8 to 12 there. And then because of my lifestyle being in a trailer, obviously when we're traveling in a trailer, we start to hit certain wind speeds and the risk is higher. So I'm probably going to be personally tweaking my situational awareness around different grouping. So I would say that starting out, looking through, what information you can find around the type of observation. And I'm looking at a Beaufort, which is looking at active signs of wind. But situational awareness, I don't need it all. Now, the other thing I did on this is I changed the names of all of them. In the actual Beaufort scale, half of them are breezes and half of them are types of gales and types of breezes. And for me, it just didn't resonate. It wasn't something I could feel like it was intuitive or instinctive for me to relate to it. And I'm not doing like a protocol or monitoring, so I don't have to like try and have the same stuff. I just want to cue into it. And so I kind of define them on how they kind of the naming regime that really resonated a difference of what it's going to feel like. And so to me, I'm not trying to have consistent data and naming for a protocol. I want to tune in. And so I renamed them in ways that felt meaningful. So I don't know if you have any questions related to that, but I narrow for situational awareness. I'm narrowing what I'm looking at, and I have renamed things to better, when I'm out there, that name and knowing it's triggering that level means something more.
So did you also kind of ground truth this with a little wind speed meter and kind of?
So I just, in this one, is my baseline. I just illustrated it based on the descriptions. So the description said, when they're at this wind, and these wind speeds is when you first, like 4 to 7, that's when you really start to feel it on your skin. So it's like, I just tried to represent that. My ongoing journaling practice, and I'll show you some of those, is trying to ground. This is my comparison, like a baseline, like, this is in general, trying to visualize what that might look like. Eventually, if I ground truth this, and this is very generalized, I would do it toward maybe a different one for different habitats even. It's like, this is my desert Beaufort scale.
Yeah.
This is my conifer Beaufort scale. This is my pine forest. This is my oak woodland. So this is generalized, just kind of when they describe it, winds at this particular range are going to give these types of influences. But, and so it's just guiding your thinking. And then you have an ongoing practice that you want to see how that relates to your specific environment, because obviously a lot of these are trees. The Griggs Putnam is all trees. You might have a very different ecosystem and might have like a lot of deciduous trees, which don't have leaves half the year, and it's going to change your observations. So this was a baseline.
What is the wind speed at which angry school teachers on their bicycles are swept into the air past you?
I would guess it's going to start around that 32 to 38, maybe, where you're kind of losing your footing, maybe, or you bump up to getting up to the 39 to 46. And I feel for situational awareness, you might start to change your wind speeds based on your environment and your activity. Again, it's your situation, whatever environment you're in and the observations you need. So
this makes me really want to. I've been carrying a Beaufort scale, a Beaufort bow. I've been carrying a wind scale with me for a while, but I never thought of, for the habitats you're in, how accurate are those, leaves versus light, small branches moving and those sorts of things. It would be so much fun to kind of ground truth this in the habitats where we explore. I love that idea.
yeah, even seasonally. And you think about, and so I have the little tiny illustrations on the side, which actually came from some different research about wind, had nothing to do with the Beaufort scale, but the study had shown that certain leaf types, the size and the shape, and the length of the petiole are going to change. Like aspen are very sensitive because they have a long petiole. And so even in a light wind, they start to rattle. Where
they also have that part of their stem is flattened.
Yep.
Which gives it extra wiggly.
But during a certain seasons, you won't even have the leaves. So, what other things are you queuing into? But so looking at things like the petiole, the leaf size, the leaf shape based on wind speeds, and also considering it's going to change over seasons. And so really digging in deep on your Beaufort scale can really enhance your awareness and your cues in a changing environment.
This is next level geeking out that you're going to make me do. I'm going to put that little, I've got a little wind speed meter. I'm going to stick it back in my journal kit, and I want to ground truth these. I love your idea also of like the branch with leaves on it is going to, small branches are going to move in a different way when the leaves are on the tree and the leaves are off the tree. I I have been doing just wind speed light and just taking for granted that whatever it says on this tool is giving my wind speed. I love this.
Cool. I love it too. I love, yeah, it's super fun and you can just do so much with it. You already flipped through and showed the table. I love the reference. There was a kind of a shorter version in the firefighter, one of their manuals, because it helps you with predictions, the types of winds. You have winds that are mostly driven from weather systems, your general winds, the higher up of cold fronts, warm fronts, those sorts of things. But then there's terrain driven winds. Your solar eclipse, we were talking about winds and the difference of when you have sunlight and not sunlight and how it changes the winds. But so not just how much sunlight, but what type of terrain and how is that doing? And so in fire, they've narrowed it down and described that the wind speed and the wind direction, if you're just being influenced by terrain winds, you have specific downslope winds, upslope, you have sea breeze, land breeze, up valley, down valley, and they have a typical range of wind speed and they have a direction. And so if you have kind of assessed your landscape and the shape of it and you know what's there, you can kind of predict based on, okay, well, I know that, those downslope winds happen late in the evening after it's cool and the air is pushing down. And so I can make predictions based on the shape of my land, using a combination of the terrain, your weather forecasts for general weather systems. And so I personally use a table like this to help me in predicting and thinking about. And so a lot of my predictions, I'm always doing a little landscape sketch in my journal because I want to, and I often use Google Earth, or you had to have had a webcam or some way to get an idea of the shape of the land. Sometimes I just try to imagine it, and that's all I'm trying to sketch. So I can kind of picture the direction and where these different terrain winds come. But super helpful to think about sunlight and terrain and how it influences wind.
Yeah, I remember my scoutmaster teaching me that, and we're up in the Sierra Nevada, we all sort of pitched our tents, sort of thinking which way the winds were going to blow in the early afternoon. And then evening rolled around when it got cold, and the wind direction changed directions because it went from upslope winds during the heat of the day to downslope winds as things cooled off.
Yeah. Yeah. And so just camping, where to set up your tent, thinking about winds of not only blowing against your tent, but what kind of trees and things could fall. If you're going to have a lot of high winds in there, maybe you've looked the shape of the trees and the vegetation and seen that, this area can have some high winds. And so maybe I'll stay away from certain vegetation types or different spots within the landscape. So your situational awareness doesn't have to be fire. It can be a lot of things. So this is another one of my very sloppy situational awareness practices. And I will say, I actually, in doing it, this was a pretty big journal. And I knew that the forecast was expecting heavier winds, and I didn't want to carry it out and have it flapping and potentially tearing. I actually had a little pocket notebook, and all of this stuff I had quickly sketched and diagrammed and done my little map on it. And then I came and put it all back into a bigger thing to look at it together, along with, I very often want a table with my forecasted weather, partly to compare it with what I experienced. I do have a Kestrel, so I could be measuring actual wind speed, but you don't have to. You could just go out and compare. What are you feeling? What does it seem like is really happening there? Because your weather forecast is usually a general area, not always going to be the exact same of what you're experiencing. So to journal that, and I really like putting in a little route map, because obviously you're going to be where you experience the wind, it's going to be from different directions if you're changing it. And you might sense wind direction more from the side of your face than from the front or from the back, and so trying to experience the wind from different angles and different areas. You've got your meter there.
Oh yeah,
Jack?
yeah.
Yeah.
So um, this has been starting to collect some dust up on my shelf, but you're going to make me now start running around with a little wind speed meter more. And that's really fun. So thank you for that.
Yeah. And if you keep training on it, eventually you'll be able to just use the environment to
Right.
tell you. Yeah.
Yeah, but I just realized I thought that, because I've got my Beaufort, my FERT scale, that I don't need to carry this anymore. But this makes me want to kind of like let's get a system that is place specific and seasonal specific. This is going to be a lot of fun.
Cool. Um, so also in my situational awareness, kind of trying to think about the future and make predictions. I don't always explain it everywhere. My predictions, having a forecast is offering me some of a prediction from what I'm doing. Ideally, I should be basing it also on observation. So in this particular one, I started in the morning and I could see these gap clouds. I was in the Desert Hot Springs area in Southern California, and one big sign is it's filled with windmills. So that should tell me there's a lot of wind from a particular direction. But that morning, the mountains up in the one direction had these clouds filled in there. And when those lift, you're going to have much more extreme winds coming through when that type of weather thing happens. But just noticing that and thinking about it. And then also I walked part of the trail, started to get up into some more carved terrain and thinking about as I'm going and through the process of, relating what I'm feeling with what could it be tied to is part of my predicting, and then how might that change throughout the day. And I've got my past winds with the little creosote bushes looking at the lee side, and noticed pretty consistently most of them had debris and more grass and more vegetation on one side than another. So it was kind of cool to see wind in different ways. And then also kind of looking at the sky in a different way. So that's just one way that I've kind of tried to practice journaling and writing notes. This is another way I've done it. As I mentioned, I like to have something that gives me a sense of the landscape. So I had my little block landscape sketch there, trying to think of what the landscape looks like at a different angle so I could imagine winds moving through it. I also really like to do maps. Almost everything I do has a map on it. And I'm lazy. I have stencils for my maps. I found a size that works for a common space. And sometimes I just use that to put a lot of my location data, but I have a visual. And so in that particular one, because that day I was doing more wind observations, it's a coastal state. And the Columbia River goes out into the ocean and has a lot of sea breeze and land breeze influences. So knowing the time of day and the type of topography features there, I know that there are going to be certain types of winds coming through there. And I can have just really primitive looking mountain ranges and think about what types of wind I might experience in a certain area. So I do always love that. I also use those same map stencils for doing I'll sketch on there if there's a high pressure or low pressure system or something in there if I'm thinking about other winds that are likely influencing what's going on. So I usually always have a map. I usually always have something giving me terrain. And then I try to think about the past winds, the Griggs Putnam Index and the Beaufort scale. I kind of flip around how I actually journal it. Sometimes I will just leave blank space where I think I want to come back and stencil in and add that other information, which is oftentimes I'm looking on a Google Earth or something, and then just free space. Or I might pre-do it. I might just, and I kind of personally like that because I feel more organized and I stay more focused if I set up the stuff I know I need and want to use, and then I can go out and sketch the stuff as I'm going, but keep referencing back and thinking about that map and the landscape. So I tend to put a lot of information and combine it all together. And then I ran out of space. So I felt like I wasn't talking and thinking through my predictions well enough. So I started pasting in vellum paper, which I really like. It's a little, can be thinner than other papers. So I don't feel like my sketchbook's getting too filled up with stuff. I did make the mistake of taping it in the middle. So now I can't just see my spread, the 2 pages, without having to flip around those. So I've now taken to taping it on the top of my page. So I can just flip it up and look at it or flip it down. I've also like to use these if I want to expand on my sensory observations that I kind of want to relate to what's on the basic page below it, or data graphs, or put that kind of stuff in there. So sometimes I want it all together. You can spread it out, but kind of depends on how your brain works. But I do like to have I do a lot of insert paper where I have a map on the top and I flip it up and have a lot of more scribbly notes or data stuff on it. So I kind of thin out how busy my page is.
I love this idea of this sort of lift the flap, or these transparent sheets you're putting over your journal page, or then can have more of a conversation with the stuff that's below them. What interesting. I just sort of wonder how our thinking would, this is getting really meta, but how does our thinking change when you kind of give yourself this tool in addition to that first page that's there?
Yeah, that was my intent of going back to that. You see on the right, I have because I pay a lot of attention to plant phenology when it's dry and the different phases. And so on the next one, I wanted to think about the senses of how did they feel. And so I can look at it, especially if I press down on the page and see it, and think about my notes of what did it sound like? What did it feel like? More those fuels. And so that was kind of my intent, was as I'm thinking through those notes, I'm looking at what I had on the bottom. So and I did this not too long ago. I do think it's pretty challenging to really get into your Beaufort scale observations because of gusts and things happening, and it can happen so quick that you just couldn't get it. I have tried to use plastic graph paper to kind of get an idea of movement, but I don't want something flapping around. So I've actually taken to using my iPhone. The view screen can be graphed. And so I can kind of look at something through that and kind of try to see if it's helping get an idea of how far past straight or 90 degrees or these different angles or within a graph box. And then, or also you could be holding up a ruler or holding up something, a level, to know what's straight. And then kind of try to see if, since you can't catch every detail, how often or how far past a certain angle can kind of help you. And this one I did have observations early when there were light winds, and it was just that kind of yellowy cream color because I knew I wanted to have multiple layers. And so I have the vegetation. This was a willow, and it was pretty much everything just kind of straight hanging out. And then I saw the winds were going to be picking up. So I wanted to go back out over this and see the amount of change over the top of it. So this is 2 different time periods on that, trying to see the scale of movement. So I don't know if that makes sense, but that was something else that I've realized. It's kind of hard to tell the degree of movement, of vegetation movement, and whether you're using graphs or some kind of angles. And the same thing for the Griggs Putnam, on just kind of looking at how far of an angle. Sometimes it's very subtle, and sometimes the lean is topography influence, but kind of using things to help you really get an idea of how far off on angles are these to get a degree of sculpting or movement.
What a brilliant way to think about this. See, folks, this is another reason why I wanted you to kind of get into Miriam's brain here. Like this idea, if you're not specifically interested in willow shrubs and how they move in wind, how can this way of thinking be applied to other sorts of things? I think this is just such an interesting visualization and way of recording information so you really understand what you're seeing. That's cool.
Cool. And I didn't want to go into a lot of detail on this one. This is in the book, describing, again, over time. It can be a lot like storytelling because it's changing and realizing that, and this is around cold fronts, but knowing that the direction that it's coming can tell you whether it's a cold front, or you know ahead of time you're expecting it, and go out and feel, what does that direction feel like? The clouds are different before it comes in, as it's coming in, when it's over you, when it's moving out. The winds are changing direction and you have different cloud types. So you can kind of plan out a time series and do kind of storybook style, but thinking about it, things over time. So like the previous drawing was overlapped, and this is just more of a time series. So that was all I wanted to point out on this one. Okay, so this is the point, and it looks like we are getting closer on time. I did have a second part of the presentation, but I guess I'll just mention, it was kind of in a way, a flip side of situational awareness. Instead of your personal situation and safety and what you're trying to do, kind of how do you focus on that, to how do you think about changing thresholds, maybe we call them hazard levels, and apply that towards the nature, that, and especially temperature and humidity. Plants, they're not just like this separate living thing like we are, getting through different temperatures. Their whole functional process to go through photosynthesis, to do all that, they're completely integrated with temperature and moisture. It's like their heart and lungs are associated with their relationship with that, with nature. It is really amazing and fascinating. But there are certain temperature thresholds that they're very sensitive to, and for different phases. And so you've probably seen, I'll just quickly flip to a couple of them. My temperature keys is thinking about these different temperature levels and how it influences the functions of plants. So, and maybe that's another time, but I can go through this more, but I kind of felt like maybe you did want to talk about if there are things people want to do more situational awareness, since we kind of talked about that, or maybe there are things about the book. So I kind of feel like I would zip through this last part, and it might be better to just have some discussions if you wanted.
Yeah, maybe let's pause for a discussion here, and maybe what we could do is even have you on another day to continue kind of geeking out on these sorts of things. Your brain is just
Geeky.
it is fun to kind of get in there and play in your neurons. The things that you get curious about. Are things that I'm embarrassed to say, like, haven't even been on my radar. And then you sort of point them out as phenomena that we could investigate and explore, and it just makes my world bigger and richer. Yeah, I agree with Philip. Just Philip saying that this makes my brain grow. So I feel my little neurons kind of twitching and itching inside the skull right now, and that's really, really fun. Let's bring in Susan said I'm gonna need to buy a bigger hat. I love you people. I do.
Yep. Stop sharing.
Oh yeah, let's stop sharing and let's bring in some folks in conversation. We're interested about what makes what is this I'll get folks thinking about, and questions, and where do you go with that? Oh, people were wondering about these sorts of things, sort of kestrels and skymates. There's a bunch of different brands. I think you just do a search for pocket, what is it, anemometer? Don't know how to pronounce it, but a long word that starts with the letter A. There can't be too many of those. Yeah, and they will often give you temperature, wind speed, and a few other parameters. Some do barometric pressure, and that's sort of it's a fun way to be able to quantify what you're seeing. Let's jump over to actually while you were talking about sort of situational awareness, Sarah Reed had a personal account of um, of an experience in a fire zone. If you felt comfortable talking about that, we would love to hear that as and sort of what this discussion makes you feel about. If you don't feel comfortable with that, no pressure.
I'm fine talking about it now because we're at 6 years later. So just within half a mile from my house, the 2017 Tubbs fire came within that close to my house. But that fire was also called, there was parts of it called the Nuns Fire, which has been more in my periphery and radar since because of the parks that I frequent that were affected by the nuns part of that fire. But what happened to me, and this was part of my situational awareness that I observed, that came to my mind weeks later after we got through evacuations and park closures and the terror and emotions, and I could kind of come back to and visit the day. That Sunday, I was at a California Naturalists Conference at Pepperwood Preserve, just north of our town. And so there's just this huge group of naturalists, and we were doing different seminars that day. I was learning about iNaturalist out in the field with one of the founders of iNaturalist. But as the day progressed, we all started noticing how the breeze felt, and most of us were in sleeveless shirts because it was a really super nice day. And it was kind of like we were going, ew, this kind of feels weird. It was creepy feeling the wind. And as it continued in the afternoon, some of us were referring to it as kind of like this gypsy wind. It just was creepy. It was kind of floating around. It just felt strange. And so weeks later, when I revisited what happened that day and the following night, I realized we were all having situational awareness of that coming event that we didn't even know was going to happen. We'd never experienced anything like this before in our recent history. The fire before that was 1964. So for a lot of people, it was before their time. And so that kind of helped me to acknowledge that when we get the creepy feeling, there's a good reason for it. It instills that flight or fight response, which is what we were having that afternoon. Some people actually left the conference because they were starting to become concerned about the wind and where we were located. By 3:30 that morning, my phone was ringing off the hook and I was hearing barn fire horses. And we ended up evacuating our horses out of the ranch where my horse was, south of Santa Rosa, which was way out of the area where I live. But nobody knew at that time that the fire had swept around through a valley and down a canyon south of Santa Rosa. Everybody was focused on the north of Santa Rosa where the big developments were and where Kmart had melted. But nobody realized the fire was sweeping down and actually headed towards another city south of Santa Rosa. So it was very traumatic, but it was also a really great learning experience in acknowledging that innately we have this intuitiveness about what's happening around us. And if we really key into that, we'll notice more if we acknowledge it, like that creepy feeling of the wind.
Yeah.
Since those fires, and we've had another one, we had the 2020 glass fire also, which swept through a lot of the same area. I had to go from that trauma feeling, and I do have PTSD from that whole experience, and the wind. We had 70-mile-an-hour winds driving that fire, those fires. I had to go from being traumatized by it and very grief-ridden over the parks and the landscape that I was intensely familiar with, and seeing the devastation. And we still refer to some of the areas of having been nuked. But I've had to progress through healing by going out into those landscapes and experiencing the recovery that nature does, and seeing those little things that I think a lot of people don't notice. Like there was one trail that I went to over and over and over again where I'd seen this live oak tree that was completely denuded of all foliage. But I noticed where the mistletoe had grown on that tree started sprouting back within a year. And right now, 6 years later, you can't tell that tree was ever touched by fire unless you were digging through the poison oak to the trunk and saw the black scorch marks, because it's completely covered with foliage and the mistletoe is dead.
Wow.
So seeing things like that is just like, wow, there's this awe in the nature. It's not to say that every single day driving around our area, we still see all of our ridge tops and our forests are burned. There's just tons, millions of Douglas fir trees that are just big matchsticks that have no foliage left. The redwood trees epicormically sprouted on their trunks. So instead of having branches coming out from the tree, they look like fuzzy green telephone poles. And now I've gotten to notice that, and I kind of like send blessings out to those trees of, oh, you're still alive, you're thriving, you're still doing your thing. Yay, it's green, you know. And then experiencing the progression of wildflowers, seeing the fire followers that bursted forth that next spring, but now haven't been. Like, you know, we don't see whispering bells now. It was just that first 1 or 2 years. But there's other things that have taken the place of those immediate fire followers. And now I'm starting to see a change of the canopy growing back, and how some of those flowers and plants that were there before the fire they're evolving with the landscape as it changes. So it's been really interesting.
So I did want to say a couple of my chapters, the post-fire, the after the fire observations, talking about fire severity. I think what's really one thing that I have noticed in doing fire education is that a lot of people's sense of fire in their landscape, because there can be very long terms between different fires and our ecosystems have changed. But when you see a burned landscape, because I see people showing photos of what they call like, oh my God, it's burned and it's charred. And it was a low severity fire. It actually is probably good for the ecosystem. And a lot of fires have a mix of low and high, and some ecosystems actually need high severity fire. But so I tried to go through and show differences of observing what would a high severity versus a low severity look like, and how do you see it on your landscape, and get a feel of, you know, and think about what could have been different. Was it terrain? Was it concentration of vegetation? But kind of adding more context to not just, I'm not used to seeing fire, it's horrible, it burned, but trying to kind of see what severity means for the ecosystem, you know, not just your sense of it. So
exactly. And one of the things I volunteer a lot for our regional park system here, and a lot of my volunteerism is providing interpretation of the landscape and the park to visitors. And this one park that I really am intimately familiar with, that parts of it I consider were nuked. And it's a serpentine landscape. It had huge Sargent cypress trees, which are evolved to the serpentine landscape. Very specific scenario on that ridge in our county. And those Sargent cypress completely were gone after the 2017 fires. What I noticed within 3 years is they started sprouting. So we had that after fire, because the cones were affected by the fire. It needs fire to regenerate and to germinate. Those trees are now coming back. And by the glass fire that came through in 2020, even though some of those areas were burned by the glass fire, the Sargent cypress survived. So they were just baby trees. Some of them aren't even 2 feet tall, even still, but they didn't burn in the 2020 fire. So one of my interpretive moments for people is you go up there on Hood Ridge and you see the devastation of these wildfires, but look at the baby cypress. They're coming back. This is exciting. And because of those and what they're evolving with from the fire, there's a ton of California yerba santa that is establishing root systems in those areas, helping to facilitate the soil staying put and providing pollinator rich blossoms. And, you know, there's all this neat regrowth. So if we look past the melted manzanitas that are black and look craggly and stuff, and some people I even heard said, oh, they should go in and just cut down all those burned manzanitas, they're so ugly. And I'm like, but look beneath those. Now there's sprouts. Some of our local ecologists didn't even think the manzanitas would resprout after the fires. And now there's rings around some of those manzanitas. There's even nursery trees, which I've noticed, like some of the live oaks are protecting sprouts of manzanita and madrone, specifically on the north side of their canopy, because that they're shading those and creating areas where they're not getting really harsh summer sunlight and temperature. So it's kind of like their nursery trees helping those grow back up. And it's just mind boggling, even though I still can drive around our area and get kind of sad looking up at our hillsides. But it also exposed rock. That's another observation I noticed is that I grew up here. So I've been seeing some of these hillsides for almost 60 years. So I noticed that some of those areas that got burned so significantly where the Douglas fir are gone, there's suddenly these huge rock formations that I'd never noticed before that you can see from the valley floor. And it's like, wow, look at that. There's another rock formation that never was visible. And there's a lot more rock here than you thought because it was all covered up with canopy before. So there you go.
Wow. Um,
Kaboom.
no, yeah, Sarah, so first of all, that experience of being in and among those fires sounds really, really terrifying. So sorry that happened to you and um, that and your community. Um, I really am interested in what you're saying about how the process of kind of going back into these environments and paying attention and journaling in them is a powerful way of healing
Mm-hmm.
and recovering from that trauma. To look for this regrowth. Something that I really like about this sort of sort of a meta framework of this book here is Miriam is looking at how to look into the past and see, what is the past evidence of fire during the fire, how to look at the moment um, and see that, and then and then kind of going into the future, kind of sort of be able to predict things. So this sort of thinking of fire as instead of there was nature here and then a fire happened and now it's gone. That the fire is a part of nature and you're able to be in a place and kind of look through time and see those sorts of influences. I'm glad those little Sergeant Cypress are kind of popping back in there. The other thing I wanted to point out that you mentioned that was interesting is how a lot of people were kind of getting this low brain stem feeling of something is wrong, right?
Yeah, that was really interesting. And I can't even say that it's because we were all California naturalists. It's
Right.
because we were spending the day outdoors and feeling this change. And it wasn't just our typical afternoon marine layer breeze, which we often feel this far inland. We're about 45 minutes from the Pacific Ocean. And we often get an afternoon little shift in the temperature and the breeze and fog coming in, perhaps, especially even in October. And it was different, and it kind of raised the hair on your arms, a little
Yeah.
bit. That's what I really felt. um and I have a really healthy fear of wind. I know I always have. Even as a child, I would get nervous when I'd hear wind in the top of the pine trees when we were camping, even though I didn't really have anything experientially to relate it to. I had somebody once practicing some psychic skills on me and said that I had died in a previous life coming across the plains. Either I or my baby had died in like a tornado. Now I can watch Wizard of Oz, but I cannot look at storm chaser stuff. And tornadoes scare the stuffing out of me. And you could never pay me to go to some place where there's hurricanes. But I've learned to be a little bit more comfortable with wind until these fires. And now I have a pretty strong PTSD reaction to it. And I really have to work with myself when I hear the wind or feel the wind, especially when it reaches a certain intensity. And when we've had dry, like when it gets to be September, October, I start to get really nervous. And that's when I key into windy.com. I look at our fire alert cameras and see what's going on. I pay attention to what our relative humidity is. I also watch some of the other fires start on the fire alert cameras, so I'm really aware of what the wind is doing and what the plume of smoke looks like coming up out of the forest through those wild fire cameras. So I've done a lot of self-observation that way too, and then just kind of being aware of how I'm reacting to that information that I'm getting from those resources, and from what the information I'm getting from just simply listening and looking out my windows here, and saying, okay, you know you're safe, you're within feet of a fire hydrant, you know that you've got your go bags packed all the time, you can throw them in the car. I know where I could go to feel safe, like in a parking lot or something, and get the dogs and me out of my house if that's a concern. But and then I also know I'm not going to be out in the forest when the wind is blowing. That's just a safety thing. And but when it gets to be those late August, September, October, it gets scary. And I don't think that will ever leave me. It wouldn't chase me out of living here. A lot of my friends have moved out of state because of this. And yet, like some of my friends in Texas, what have they just been experienced in the last 2 months? They've experienced catastrophic wildfires in Texas. So it's everywhere. So I think the awareness is really important, and whatever you can do to help yourself feel the most safe in thinking about that awareness, whether you just have your go bags packed, whether you know that you're always carrying a gallon of water in the car in case you see something spark alongside a roadside, which is another thing I do, that and a bath towel I always have in case I see something sprouting or sparking up, and to wash poison oak off and other things. But, it's just, it's a different level of awareness now. And it's something that I think that we all need to be prepared for, no matter where we are. And especially if we travel, if we're camping or going different places, just being aware of how you can feel the most safe where you are.
Miriam, you're currently muted.
I can't stay on a whole lot longer since we're traveling today. So I wanted to see if there were any other questions that we could get in before we wrapped up.
Sarah, thank you so much for those thoughts and ideas. I see Tiffany also has some thoughts to share. Sarah, thank you so much for that.
Oh, sorry. Do you want me to go?
Tiffany. Yes,
Okay.
please. Thank you for being here with us.
Thank you. This was really great. I'm a geographer, so for me, like, all of this is definitely in my wheelhouse, but I feel very inspired. I work with students who generally don't have a whole lot of experience in natural environments, at least not obviously there's some nature in the urban environment as well. But I was curious how much experience you have with people who don't might not already sort of be thinking like this, you know what I mean? And what are some strategies that you use to help people understand the importance of it, or get people excited about it, you know what I mean? Or maybe you don't have a ton of experience with people who aren't already nature journaling or doing that kind of stuff. Anyway, that's the question
for me and John.
Yes.
I guess I'll start. Partly in my career, at the level I was working, I was usually a teach the educators at, kind of working with curriculum or that sort of thing. So I didn't often have to work or get the chance to, because it's a lot more fun working hands-on. So it was very frustrating not to have those opportunities. So I would have to say, for me, part of it was the book, because in the job, they don't teach you personally one-on-one. They just tell people there's an alert, or, how do you get it out there? They don't try to help people get to know the value and experience in that. And so I did try to walk through that. And in developing the book, it took 4 years, but part of it was I was continually doing workshops with people like Jack or people in fire that are working hands-on and trying to refine the exercises or kind of help them walk through. So I wish I had more of working with individuals that don't have awareness, because I was working with people interested in nature, interested in fire. So I do feel like I'm lacking some of that, but maybe Jack has some insights since he's been doing this forever, and situational awareness is broader than just fire. So I'll pass it to him for that.
Thank you, Miriam. What I would probably do is start in a post-fire environment, because that will get people's attention. Well, a live fire would also get their attention, but then you've got other kind of classroom safety issues. But Miriam's book has a bunch of clues in it of things that you can look for to be able to read the fire, that these sorts of things tell that the fire started here, it moved here, then was high intensity here, was low intensity there. And in doing that, there's a couple things. One is you're teaching people how to pay attention and be able to read the landscape. You're also then, it's sort of like a CSI sort of a situation. It's the fire scene investigation strategies. And then you can professionals actually do this, and they'll trace it back to go like, oh, the fire started right here, and then it went, I can tell by this clue and this clue and this clue that it then moved this way, and this way, and look, here's the cigarette butt that did it, right? So the that would get people's attention, and then I would move into a pre-fire environment. And then you've got people's attention. What you can look around, there's a bunch of clues in here of like, what are fuel loads? What are all these sorts of things, how to get people to pay attention to these other indicators. But I think that places that are post-fire have a lot of intrinsic interest.
And I would say on a post-fire, the best is to start where there's low severity. And so the stuff I have in my book is actually from the training manuals for fire investigators. And so those are the same things they look at, although I didn't include as much information. But being on an edge, somewhere where you can compare and look at, here's unburned, was it the same type of vegetation, and how did that, so if you can be along an edge of a burned area and where you see a mix of severity, and you can go online, there are some online maps, severity maps, that show you by different colors where you had a mix of them. So if you can have a mix of what, the high severity versus moderate and low severity, or be on an edge, would be a great spot to see unburned and a full range. And so you could go to one of the online fire severity maps and look at that. Obviously, access to them can be some issues and some safety about being in a burned area. A lot of those places are closed. But you can find those, and you can go out and also look for lightning scars, burn scars, and even if there's no char or burned grasses and it's all grown back, you can still be assessing, what the fire had done, how it had moved, and talk about uphill versus downhill, steeper versus flatter, and vegetation type. So I agree with Jack about having some post-fire, although you might want to kind of not do it in their same neighborhood right away if they're pretty traumatized. It would be too overwhelming. And so, reaching different groups where it's had a little time after that, or bringing people in from outside, or bringing a specialized kind of trauma-informed expert that knows how to work through that, or get some lessons on that.
Yeah, I think especially if you're dealing with people in a community that has experienced fire, what Miriam's saying about finding trauma-informed, working with people who kind of really study that, and what are the best ways kind of to approach people with that is very, very, very important. Otherwise, what we'll do is we'll just kind of get into that environment and shut ourselves down. I think that's really wise. But being in that environment helps people understand the relevance of this. If I walked into a forest where there's no fire and just started talking about fire, it's theoretical. It's much more tangible if I would be going through a place where the fire has been. But I want to make sure that I'm doing that in a way that's going to be sensitive to the students in my group who have experienced that trauma. That's a very, very, very good point. I
There
also want
are,
to, yeah, sorry, please.
I was just going to mention there are plant adaptations you could look at if there isn't a recent fire, that just the leaf size and the leaf shape, and talking about their traits. Are they more oily? That kind of thing can talk about this landscape these plants have adapted to or need fire. And so it's not as relevant. It's just a little tricky on that where you see where fire was active and how impacted. So maybe prescribed, or I mean, that to me, those are the best places where they've had prescribed fire. Hopefully people haven't been as impacted, and ideally there have been less severity or a mix of it that you can see. So but there are things that may not show any fire, but you could talk about and look at, they need fire, and how to look at those, talking about bark types and leaf shapes and stuff. And so I do include a mix of those, of how you can go in and look at those and think about, those are the types of plants adapted to and that need fire. So it's another way. Oh, sorry, Jack, go ahead.
Yeah, and just to tag into that, there's also going to be, as you go into those environments, there are going to be, as you sort of different periods post fire, there'll be different things happening. And so the Cold Canyon Notebooks book, maybe we can put a link to the chat in the chat with the right name of that book. Wonderful kind of look over time at what is happening post fire, and what you'll see is different plants are adapted in different ways to the fire. So some have like a big root burl, and it's like the fire blasts everything on top, and then whoop, we pop up. Others, they're going to create hardened seeds that can survive the fire, but they need actually the shock of the fire in order to germinate. And they're not going to bloom unless there's a fire. So they're, and then other plants, will, chamise will, it's set up so that when the fire comes through, it's got all these oils in it that burn really, really hot and fast. So it's going to encourage the fire through the environment. And then, so there's all these interesting strategies of how plants survive fire. Trees with serotinous cones, all these, those are really fun. Oh, and if you are doing stuff in places with trees with serotinous cones, find an unopened cone and bring a little camp stove. Pop your camp stove out there, put the cone on top of it. First, pass a cone to like the biggest, toughest, strongest student in the group, and see if she can, how can you open up this cone, right? And they can't do it. And then you put it on top of the little camp stove, turn it up, and you heat it up, and within minutes, all those scales are going to pop open, and then you can shake it, and all these seeds fall out. Oh, it's cool. So that's fun. The other thing I wanted to mention, perhaps before we're going to wrap it, one, we want to know if people want to get a copy of this, how they can get it. We'll get to that question in just a moment, but I also wanted to put on people's radar, there's an interesting book called The Gift of Fear by Gavin de Becker, which is more talking about kind of assessing threats from human behavior, and how to tell if, and they're talking about like that kind of, Sarah's talking about that low brainstem feeling of like something is wrong, and that when we get that feeling that is something is wrong, to respond to it and to treat it like it is a real thing. That is your brain trying to help you survive. But if we go around hypervigilant, we overwhelm our ability to pick up on that because we're just too but it talks about more in terms of human threats, how to pick up on these things. But the same idea of, you're not wanting to go around hypervigilant, but you want to be able to be aware of what are indicators that you really want to pay attention to, how to pay attention to those when they show up, so that we're not just going on around in a period, in a state of constant vigilance and stress. Before we wrap, Miriam, would you talk to us about if people wanted to get a copy of this, where they can go that would best support you rather than Jeff Bezos, how we can do that, and also if people wanted to follow you and learn more about your work, what might they do?
So I self-published on two different platforms. So one is just on Amazon, and that was more, I live full time in a RV, a trailer, and so I can't store books or ship them around. So people can individually go on Amazon and order it, but they can also be ordered through bookstores. I couldn't, for them to be stocked at a bookstores, I don't think that'll happen, because a lot of their policies are that the publisher, which is me in this case, would have to pay for returns and the shipping of those or the destruction of those. And I just can't afford that. So I still publish there. But so they'll order them. So you could go to a local bookstore, and the publishing service I was through puts it out for all the books that can be ordered. So you can go to any bookstore, and you should be able to order them there. That should be available if you don't want to go through Amazon.
We encourage you to go to your local independent bookseller. It will be less convenient than going online to Amazon, but it's going to make a difference in your community.
It doesn't make a difference really financially for me. I think there's only like a few cents more. I tried to make it as cost effective, so I'm not really getting all that much of a royalty on either one. So I personally tried to keep it low. The bookstore will probably be a little pricier because they're trying to make money off of them. So anyhow, financially, it won't make a huge difference to me either way, since I tried to make it as low as possible on either platform. And on social media, I have a Facebook page, Pyrosketchology. I am on X or Twitter, and under Pyrosketchology. And then I'm also on Instagram. I'm not super active on any of them, but I try to just be consistent on fire-related stuff. So it'll kind of come and go when you see stuff there. I do try on occasion to organize field trips and that sort of thing. I did more of that when I was working, because when I had a budget and could do stuff. Now, I'm happy when somebody wants to sponsor a hike or a workshop or a field trip and support those. So most of those happen when people reach out and go, hey, we have a prescribed burning program or a training, and we want to do that. And if I can't, I know Jack and people in nature journaling that know how to nature journal. And if they have the book, or I've worked with them in the past, they can help kind of focus on what to observe and how to do it. I partnered with Jack and Robin Lee Carlson on what's called a prescribed fire training exchange program with the Nature Conservancy in Northern California, with some of the tribes and land managers there for a prescribed fire journaling when they have active fire, which to me is the ideal scenario, where you can have the experts that did the burn plans, that know the ecosystem, out there talking with you. So if people want to, if they have access to partnerships and places to do great field trips, or an area where it burned, always happy to brainstorm and support on how that can happen, because it's ideal when somebody has a place and they know their community to do it. So usually for me, it's kind of who's reaching out that has the network and the landscape that wants to do it.
I am so grateful to you for sharing your wisdom and your experience and this inspiration. Even if we're not in a place that is where fires are really visible to you, these ideas, we can apply them towards whatever habitat we're adventuring in, as you really kind of highlight ways of thinking and paying attention. And thank you so much for this timely work, and also thank you so much for taking part of your day to explore these ideas with all of us. This has been a really rich conversation, and my brain is the bigger for it.
Thank you. It's always great to work with you, Jack. I appreciate that you fit me in.
It's an absolute delight. Folks, thank you all for being here with us. I'd also like to send a shout out to Avea, the mad botanist, more for helping wrangle everything behind the scenes today. And we wish all of you joy, happiness, and safety. And we will talk with you all again soon.